Welcome to the show, Mildred, and thank you for joining me. I want to read something about this book and about your story that I found on the internet. It said, "There's nothing more crushing than being a 20-year-old pregnant, unmarried college dropout dependent on a welfare check. It's even sadder being Black and in such a predicament. Daddy's House tells a raw and poignant tale of Mildred, the third of 17 children born to strict Christian parents on a 60-acre Alabama farm. The gripping narrative, often compared to the compelling story of the Castle by Jeanette Walls, follows Mildred as she boldly confronts obstacles anchored by the strength of an unbreakable spiritual and physical mother daughter bond. So, Mildred, when I read that uh, blurb about your book, Daddy's House, it ends by talking about the strength from your spiritual and physical bond with your mother. But the book is entitled Daddy's House. So, talk to me about your relationship with your father, because this is the eve of Father's Day, and we are celebrating dads and I hope in this hour will inspire and encourage those folks that maybe have a fractured or strained relationship with their father. So tell me about your relationship with your dad.
My relationship with my father was pretty it could be tumultuous, but I tell you, it was extremely strong. As a very little girl, I was probably 5 years old when he made me a businesswoman. I was he had a milk route, and I kept his books at age 6. He gave me a pencil and a piece of paper and said, "You're going to keep track of my customers." And I did. And he taught me how to be a businesswoman. But then there were also those times when he could be kind of cruel. But I had tremendous respect for my father. I didn't necessarily fear my father, but there were times when I was terrorized by him. But overall, he was an amazingly strong figure in my life.
Well, let's talk again. I know from again excerpts from the book, uh, you describe your father as it says you grew up picking cotton, attending church every Sunday, being sheltered by what you call your two starkly different parents, a soft and gentle mother, and a harsh, critical father prone to abuse. Mildred stared defiantly into her father's eyes as she took her last beating at age 18, dressed in a yellow prom dress. So, talk, and I know eventually you've come to a place where you have a lot of respect for the lessons that your father taught you
Right.
as a strict Christian parent, but there were times in your relationship with your dad that you describe as being abusive, and you use the terms beatings that you received from your dad. So talk about those dark times, because obviously we can't fix what we don't acknowledge, and a lot of folks, I think, uh, would try to forget some of the difficult times they had with their parents, because it's just easier, right?
Yes.
To forget those times. But we know, and I've had a lot of psychologists on the show, that in order to really heal, you've got to be able to confront even those more difficult times in your relationships with your parents. So, talk about those times that your dad was abusive.
Absolutely. I wrote this book in order to heal from some of the things that I experienced with my father. I remember being a little girl. First time my earliest memory of what I would call abuse is I was 4 years old sitting on a chair. I had dressed myself for Sunday school because I had two older siblings, and I had three siblings younger than me when I was 4 years old. So nobody's paying me any attention. So I've dressed myself. I'm sitting there on that chair with my little legs. They're too short to hang over the chair. So my legs are on this chair. And I hear Dad coming through the dining room. He's singing Amazing Grace. And I look up and I smile and I think, I'm going to get a compliment. I want a compliment. And he looks at me and he says, "I didn't know you were so stupid." And I'm thinking, I'm 4 years old.
Mm,
I've never heard that word before in my life. I don't know what it means, but I looked at his face and I thought, well, I'm not supposed to be stupid. That's not something I want to be. And then he says, well, look at your socks. I've got my socks on upside down. And I thought, as an adult, I think back to that moment and I think, I'm 4 years old. I've dressed. That's a pretty big deal at age 4. And I'm going to be called stupid. But anyway, I remember one of my sisters asking me once, when did you become so self assured? You always seem so self assured. I said, and then I thought back to that moment. I just thought at that point, I'm not going to be stupid. So my father has that firm back and I've got it just like him. So he taught me something in that moment. Although I thought it was a cruel thing at the time because it just didn't feel good.
Mhm. And you describe in the book, again, very transparent, very honest, very raw, not just the what we'll call verbal abuse from your dad, but also physical abuse. Talk about the first time that you can remember your father striking or hitting you.
I remember standing in line. I don't know how old I was, but if something happened that nobody admitted to, something like his tools were missing or out of place or whatever, he lined us all. He said, "Who did it?" Nobody admitted to it. So we're standing in line by age order waiting to get a beating. And I just remember hearing the screams of my siblings in that room. He would go take one into his bedroom, close the door, and you just hear these screams, and you're standing there just waiting to get your beating. And that person comes out of that room. And I just remember those, being struck like that and just being terrorized about getting a beating. Or, if I didn't pick enough cotton, I had to pick cotton as a child. And it, we had a quota, and my quota was 225 pounds of cotton a day. And if I didn't pick that cotton at the end of the day, I got a beating. So, it was just those things that kind of terrorize you.
And Mildred, what, and I know you had a very close relationship with your mother. You described that in
Yes.
the book. Where was your mother during this period when your dad was, using physical force, was hitting, was striking you and your siblings? What would she do?
She didn't interfere. In fact, I asked her about that as an adult. Ask, why didn't you interfere on our behalf? And she said, well, I thought he was kind of rough. But after all, he was your father. That was her answer. But my father was also abusive to my mother. And,
Mm.
so I, I don't know if that's just the way some people behaved, because since I've written this book, I've had classmates, and there were two people in particular who told me, two white gentlemen, that I was very surprised that this happens in their home. This one guy said, my mother was your father. The other one said, I didn't know
Mm.
your father, nor did you know my father, but they could have been brothers. So I don't know if this was a
Mm.
Southern thing, because it certainly, I've learned, was not just in my household that this happened. And we're not talking about other households. I know that. But I do know that, I don't know, but my mom was present. She was definitely present. But as she said, he was your father. And, that was his way of disciplining.
Yeah. What is the, let's talk about that, the Southern thing, right?
Hmm.
Did you or any of your siblings, share? Like now, if a kid was hit at home, obviously they'd go to school, they'd talk about it, they'd tell your child protective services would be called. We know things were very different in that era, in that time period where you're growing up. You're on this big farm. Did you have contact with other kids? And did you all talk about what you now and your classmates have talked about as adults? Did you talk about those things as kids?
With someone outside of our home? Do you
Yes.
mean? No, no, never. That's something I,
Never. So you would never like tell another kid at school or someone you saw at church, my dad beat me, or I'm terrified that my dad is going to beat me. You were taught, I
abs-
assume you were taught to never ever share anything outside of your family's home.
Well, we weren't taught that. I guess no one ever said what happens in this house stays in this house. It, I guess it. you just learn that. And I didn't know that that wasn't happening in other people's homes. I really didn't. I guess we all have our normal, whatever that is, and you live with it. But I surely would not have ever gone out of that outside of that home and spoken of anything that was going on inside the home, because we went to church every Sunday, and my father was the Sunday school teacher. He was the piano player. He was a deacon, and he was well respected outside of the home. And I felt extremely protected from outsiders inside that home. I really did. So no, I never opened my mouth to another child, not in the house or out of the house. We never even spoke to each other about being beaten, getting beaten by our
Oh,
by our
wow. So
my, no.
you and your siblings didn't even talk about it amongst yourselves.
No, no, we did not. We talk about it and
Wow.
actually laugh about it as adults, having gone through that. And it's we somehow survived. My father said, I remember him telling my brothers once, "I'm beating you past the prison doors." And
Mm.
I can honestly tell you that there were 17 of us. 16 of us grew to adulthood, and a brother drowned right out of high school, and the 15 of us are still living. And there, I've
Wow.
had I've had brothers and sisters in a prison, but they were never prisoners. One sister was, she was actually the warden, and I have brothers that were over departments in the prisons, but we've never gone to prison. So I mean,
Let
it,
me let me stop you. That's a deep statement. Your
yes,
dad would tell your brothers, "I'm beating you past the prison doors."
yes.
What did he mean by that, if you know?
I don't know what he means. I can only think that what I'm doing to you, you'll get a lot worse in the prison. I don't want to ever see you in prison. He didn't expect us to be prisoners. He didn't expect for us to go to prison. He expected for
Mhm,
us to toe the line, and that line to be
mhm.
obedient people and not go out. And I mean, he talked about other, like some of his nephews and those folks who went to jail and went to prison and so forth and so on. But he didn't expect that from, well, that's something he said to the sons. I never heard him. He never said that to me. I'm beating you past the
Right.
prison doors.
Now, in the book, Daddy's House, you say at 18, you have a vivid memory of being 18 in your yellow prom dress,
Yes,
determining on that day, in that moment, that you would no longer take those beatings. What happened? Describe that for us.
I had gone to the prom with a young man, and one of my sisters was she was my chaperone. And she ended up at home ahead of me, saying that she couldn't find me at the prom. Of course, I was there, no idea why. But anyway, I got to the door with my prom date, and Dad snatched the door open. He snatched me inside and slammed the door in the boy's face. And he told me that he understood I wasn't at the prom. I said I was at the prom. First time I probably ever spoke back. I mean, and I didn't call it talking back. I was defending I was at the prom. He said, "Your sister said you weren't, so you weren't there." And he beat me, and I just refused to cry. I just thought, this is crazy. I'm 18 years old, and I was hoping that in a few weeks I would be gone. And so I just refused to cry. I just stood there and took that whipping, and that's the last time he ever hit me.
Wow. Well, obviously, your story, as you said, is not unique to you, not unique to your siblings. As you shared, that some of your classmates have shared living in similar homes, and we know that that form of capital punishment or corporal punishment, I guess, was used in a lot of homes across America, not just with Black families, but all kinds of families. Uh, and it was thought to be the way to discipline children. That, you said your parents were very strict religious people, and we know there's that Bible scripture that talks about, sparing the rod, and
Yes,
many people interpreted that to be a scripture directing parents to use corporal punishment, to use physical violence against their kids. And there are people today who still believe that kids, I was just with some people a couple of months ago, and they said the problem with kids today is we can't hit them. And many people believe that taking away, the rights to teachers and others to use physical force against kids or physical violence is somehow responsible for what people say are wayward, kids or teens. Uh, Studies defy that. The studies show that that kind of violence only creates people who grow up to be violent themselves. It doesn't create, disciplined, well-behaved young people. But when we come forward, we want to talk about how you overcame what today would be considered a traumatic childhood that involved both physical and verbal abuse to become super successful and to heal your relationship with your father. How did you do that? How did you think back, look back on those beatings and on that abuse, but still have so much love and respect for your dad?